Right. Good evening. I think we'll make a start. And welcome to tonight to the return of the online OKS Kings Talk. And tonight we are delighted to have Isobelle Ford. Welcome back. My name is Greg Hunter and I'm the Deputy Head Co-Curricular here at Kings. And like I said, we're delighted to welcome back virtually to Kings, former Carlyon House pupil Isobelle Ford, as she presents working as a social entrepreneur to create innovative solutions for refugee founders in the UK. Isobelle left Kings in 2010 and is the head of community ventures at TERN, a social enterprise based in London that enables refugees to thrive through the power of their own ideas by providing targeted business support. She supports refugees in many different ways, like enabling a marketplace for refugees with Anqa Collective, and is a co-founder and director of Skylight Ventures, a fund to help refugee entrepreneurs to gain early stage finance. Leading the interview part of the talk tonight is current school captain and founder of the charity Bat for a Chance, Will. Please at any time type your question into the Q&A function as part of Zoom. Or alternatively, if you would like to put your virtual hand up after the presentation during the question and answer, we can put you live on the air to ask your question yourself of Isobelle. Now, it was great pleasure that I welcome both Will and Isobelle. Welcome, Will.
Thanks, Mr. Hunter. Very kind of you. I'm delighted to be leading the interview tonight and to have Isobelle as our guest. Isobelle, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm great.
Busy week so far?
It's been a crazy week so far. Yeah, very, very hectic. I'll talk a bit more about that actually, and the relevance of yesterday's announcement, I think, during my presentation.
Yeah, definitely a very topical time to be having a talk from you, in particular also on International Women's Day. But before we dive into all things charity and refugees and some political bits and pieces at the moment, take us back to your time here at Kings. You're in Carlyon. I assume that means you lived here locally.
Yeah, so I lived about half an hour away from Kings. So my dad used to drive me in every morning. Shout out to him if he's listening. I was in Carlyon and yeah, I dated people there for sixth form. So played a lot of hockey, studied as many languages as I could really, and just generally loved being around the cathedral really. So I really love architecture and especially sort of church buildings. So that was really special. Yeah, just a lot of great memories. It's quite surreal to be coming back actually. It doesn't feel like that much time has gone past at all.
I can imagine. And if to put you on the spot a bit, if you had to pick one particular highlight that you took away from Kings, anything in particular?
Probably the time I don't know if it still happens, like hymn practice in the Great Hall, but so thank you, Will, for that kind introduction. It's really, really great to be here. And thank you so much to everyone who's joining to listen. I'm just going to share a bit tonight about my career in social enterprise. So this is a sector I didn't even know existed until about 7 years ago. And in particular, I want to talk a little bit about some of the solutions I've been working on around refugee integration. As Will said, a topic that feels particularly relevant today, given yesterday's announcement on the illegal migration bill. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the wider context of my work, hopefully share some interesting stories from my community, and also at the end, introduce some ideas and resources. So for anyone who wants to get involved, support TERN, support refugees in the UK, I'm happy to always follow up and share more ideas. So as mentioned in my introduction, I'm currently the head of community ventures at TERN. We're a social enterprise. We provide business support to refugee founders. We're currently the only UK-based provider of this kind of support. I mainly work on two initiatives I've set up. So the first is Anqa, the Anqa Collective, which is an online platform where refugee-led businesses can sell their products and services. And the second one is Skylight Ventures, which is a microfinance fund. So we offer interest-free microcredit to really, really early stage refugee businesses. I will talk about all of these a little more shortly. But first of all, I wanted to start by setting the context for the reason that this work even needs to exist. So some of you may be familiar with these numbers, but they make it clear that forced displacement is a really significant issue globally. It's not going anywhere, and it is in no way a temporary or short-term issue. So many individuals are forced out of their homes or countries of origin for over 20 years. In fact, projections suggest that increasing numbers of people will become displaced by climate disaster as well in future, on top of war and persecution. So these figures are increasing distressingly. So more than twice as many people are now forcibly displaced as in 2012, just a decade ago. These are fairly recent figures. They're from a UNHCR report last year. And if we zoom into the UK and look at the numbers of sort of asylum seekers and refugees here, there are around 230,000 refugees currently in the UK. And on top of that, around 120,000 people seeking asylum. So that's very small in terms of percentages. It's under 1% of the UK population, but they're really an underserved community. So looking at the stats on screen, it's pretty clear that there's a very significant problem with the way in which we are currently supporting refugees in the UK. And we're just not setting these individuals up to lead fulfilling lives or to be able to give back to society. And many of my clients really, really want to do that. They're incredibly keen to contribute, they're very skilled, but we see these social and economic disadvantages which persist for, again, a really, really long time. So up to 25 years, we can see that they experience disadvantages in the labour market and in terms of financial stability. So even decades after being accepted here and being awarded refugee status, they're still finding it harder to earn money than a UK native or to get a good job. And the people I'm working with are sort of surgeons, accountants, architects, skilled business owners, skilled workers. This disadvantage is incredibly unfair. It's partly down to a fairly destructive asylum process at the moment. So I don't know how many people know this, but during the process of claiming asylum, you're actually not allowed to work. There's a very limited list called the shortage occupations list. And if you can find a role on that, you may be allowed to work in a limited capacity. But outside of that, you can live on sort of £6 a day. That's the asylum support amount. And this leaves a lot of people financially very vulnerable and causes quite a lot of mental distress too, especially if you're kind of waiting on an important decision and you don't have anything to distract you. The asylum process can be very long. I've worked with some people who've waited over a decade to have a decision. So this is, a distressing issue. But also, if you want to look at it from a much more pragmatic and economic standpoint, actually, we're really limiting the potential of a group of very talented people. So at a time when there are really acute skills shortages, like sector-wide in the UK, we're not allowing a skilled group of people to contribute. And I was in a meeting this week with the London Chamber of Commerce, and they were saying that they believe refugees could meet the urgent needs that they're seeing, like in terms of a skills shortage, but there are so many barriers around confusion around right to work, asylum seekers not being able to, CV gaps for people who've had to put all that on hold while they're waiting for their claim to go through. There's not really a system for transferring qualifications between countries without sufficient documentation. So there's just so many barriers to that being used effectively, which is why in some ways, if employment is so difficult, self-employment and business are often a really attractive alternative to the refugee population here. And that's sort of the innovation area that I've focused on during my career. And it's largely where TERN comes in as well. So we started in 2016 as the only support provider in the UK offering this free support to refugees who wanted to start businesses. And we work with entrepreneurs at really, really different stages of their business journeys. So from ideation, planning, sort of idea creation, all the way up to people who have existing businesses who want to scale, access investment, or like just grow and go into new markets. So we do this through really specialized support. We offer pre-incubation programs, incubation, sort of sector-specific programs, and alongside drop-in advice sessions, we have entrepreneur socials, and something as well that's equally important that we call resilience support. So this is support with other areas of life that are not really business related, but are affecting the entrepreneur's business. So we also connect people to employability, skills sessions, housing support, mental health referrals, anything that sort of comes into their life and is stopping them from progressing with business too. So we have a lot of different areas that we manage. Although the most common support request we actually get is for support with funding and support with networking. So a refugee arriving here and starting a business is much less likely to access mainstream financial services than a UK-based founder. It also takes a really, really long time for them to build up the same kind of personal and professional networks that you or I might have after a lifetime of living here. And so that's where we really try and step in. We've come a long, long way in 6 years. We now have this growing team. By the end of the summer, hopefully there'll be 19 of us. There were 4, I think, when I started. So there were 2 founders, and then I joined with another employee. So it's been steady, steady growth. We now actually deliver 6 programs a year. That's slightly out of date. We've unlocked quite a lot of funding for founders. We now have the micro fund, which is Skylight, the online platform Anqa, and we're working with over 300 active sort of business owners in our community at the moment. But we're not just trying to launch more businesses. There's something underlying it all which is equally important, and it's not just about the number of businesses that launch or survive. It's about this sort of generation of new refugee voices coming through, empowering people to make decisions, to recover what we call self-determination, which is sort of self-confidence and purpose. And so if someone leaves one of our programs and goes into a great job or becomes an advocate or even works with us, that's also a really, really great outcome. We just want to improve people's confidence and smooth that integration process, because it's beneficial for everybody for that to happen. So before I talk a little bit more about those two specific products, those innovations, in the context of the figures I shared a few slides back, I wanted to just pause for a second. I was hoping to bring Yukai along tonight, but she's really busy. All the founders I work with are running at least 2 businesses and rarely have time to spare for talks. But I've known Yukai since I joined TERN in 2017. So I now work directly with her on both Skylight and Anqa. She actually came here in 2001, I think, when she was just 18 years old. And from Zimbabwe, she thought she'd be away for a few months until things sort of settled down and it would be safe for her to go back to her family. She applied for asylum here to be able to stay. She actually then went through a really, really long asylum claim. It was over 9 years. And during that, she couldn't work, but she actually was on the board of several charities. She volunteered loads, and that left her in a really good position once she got her status to set up her own charity. So she runs a really, really cool organisation called Active Horizons. They work in Bexley in London. They support young asylum seekers and refugees, I think under the age of 22 mainly, with everything. So accessing higher education and scholarships, getting through exams at school, doing their paperwork, finding housing. She's truly an incredible person. But this is a common theme I see. So within our community of entrepreneurs, I think over 80% of them apply with a business that has a social mission already embedded into it. So they're wanting to set up charities as well as profit-making businesses. They want to give back. And she's a great example of the sort of talent and drive that I get to work with every day. She also has a second business, a fashion business called Shumba Boutique, and that specializes in sort of handmade African textiles, accessories. She works with a sustainable collective in Zimbabwe to get them over here. And we actually had a really interesting moment together on Monday at that same meeting. So she was on a panel with me alongside Tony Smith, who used to be the director of the Border Force about 20 years ago. So that was when Yukai was applying for asylum. She was campaigning. She was often campaigning against the Home Office, against their policies. So she and Tony were on the opposite sides of sort of some picket lines. And it was a really, really interesting meeting. And she was telling him that she used to be terrified of him, and like hearing his name was really scary, and she wasn't sure how she'd feel meeting him. And he was sort of saying, "I'm teddy bear." Like, I was trying to campaign for, kinder policies, and they actually had a really, really productive conversation around viable, feasible solutions for improving the asylum system here. And it gave me a little bit of hope that those difficult conversations can maybe happen in a sort of calm, rational way, not in more of a sensational fashion like we've seen in the last couple of days with some of the headlines around migration. I'm sure you've all seen in the papers. So yeah, and then on to some of the products I've worked on. So the first thing I created at TERN was this marketplace. It's designed to meet the needs of the community to access customers, which is really, really important for a fledgling business. And we started to have this growing pool of volunteers, supporters, people who wanted to help TERN, and they began asking me, how can I buy from the refugees? How can I help? So in December 2019, I think, I ran a pop-up shop in Brick Lane, and a lot of people came along. It was really successful. So that's when Anqa was born. So a few months later, during the pandemic, I started designing and building this website with the help of this developer, a refugee developer in Lebanon called Ibrahim. And we created Anqa, and we brought 5 refugee brands onto the site originally and just sort of tested the waters. We sold to TERN supporters. We had a lot of problems. The site broke down. We fixed it repeatedly, and we just started experimenting from there. And from that point onwards, we had really positive feedback from the entrepreneurs. that Anqa was a very different experience to selling, for example, on Etsy or a competitor site where the commission's pretty high, because at that point it was commission free. We still keep the commission really, really low, but there was still a decent traction, like level of traction, decent numbers of customers coming through. And they found that the experience of selling was very user friendly for them. So Anqa has continued, and a couple of years later, we've now got 22 founders on the site. I'm trying to accelerate the growth of that. So by the end of this year, we will hopefully have 32 on there. Most of the businesses on the platform are actually female-led, and there's a really varied group of nationalities on there too. A cheeky plug, if you would like at any point to have a look at Anqa during this presentation, scan any of the QR codes and it will take you straight there. So also as well, a lot of the businesses on there have a social impact too. So they will be running sort of an ethical or sustainable business, or it will have an eco-friendly focus, which just increases the impact you're having by shopping. So at the very beginning, the website was run through sort of 30% of my time, but it turns out that's not enough. You can't really sustain a viable e-commerce business through that. So I've now fundraised to have an operations contractor who works a few days a month on just keeping things ticking for Anqa. And I also work with some marketing professionals to just expand our reach. But if there are any marketing consultants listening, we always need more help with that. So there's a huge range of products on there. It ranges from sort of ethically sourced honey that comes from London to Iranian ceramics to handmade accessories, nut butter. There's a bit of everything. And we have 2 really busy points in the year. So every Christmas, we run an online pop-up shop through November and December. Hopefully this year as well, we'll revive the in-person shop in Brick Lane. And in Refugee Week, which in the UK falls in June, we also offer an online shop partnering with Refugee Week UK. So it's just a really nice way for the brands to get a bit more visibility. And we do a lot of storytelling around that time of year too. Don't worry, I'll put the links to Anqa in the chat afterwards. And then the second project I've set up in the last few years is finance focused. So this is a microfinance fund. It's called Skylight Ventures. I'm currently a director and at the moment the only employee, which is about to change. So we're aiming to tackle the barriers founders face when trying to get funding at the very beginning of their journey. So by beginning, I mean like really as they're even testing out their idea. So normally it's a point where an entrepreneur might use their savings or ask friends and family for funding just to sort of see if the idea is viable. But within TERN's community, they don't really have that option that often. So I was looking at setting something up to offer this sort of stress-free, interest-free early stage funding to match up with our pre-incubation program. Interestingly, the money actually came from ice cream to start with. So my first pot of funding came from Ben & Jerry's. They actually designed an ice cream pint called Spice and All Things Nice, I think. And the profits from that went, the £18,000 from that went into a pot, which I then used to pilot this idea to see if it was safe and sustainable to lend to the refugees in TERN's community and get them onto repayment plans and kind of recycle the money. It went really well. So I spent the last year formalizing this and I've now built an online platform for the application so it can all be managed remotely. And I actually just got funding, the first funding for Skylight from the Whole Planet Foundation, continuing on a food theme actually from funders. And we're now their first microfinance partner in the UK, which means I will be scaling up. I'm hiring someone this week, hopefully. And by the end of this year, I hope to have lent around £60,000 to 90 entrepreneurs. And you can see on screen the ambitious plan is that by 2026, this will have increased to £600,000, distributed to 800 entrepreneurs. But if we step back just quickly on why this is relevant and needed, so the barriers we were discussing earlier around general refugee integration become more specific when a refugee is trying to start a business. So the people I'm working with consider finance essential for the growth of their business, but most of them have this huge knowledge gap. So most of them have never applied for any kind of funding, be it a grant, be it a loan, and they all don't know of the options that are out there. There's sort of a literacy gap there as well. So what I'm aiming to do is build something that is bigger than just the loan product. So focusing on a couple of areas, I really want to start working more with mainstream finance providers, so banks in the UK. So right now, the entrepreneurs I work with struggle to move on from Skylight funding to access a loan from the bank. There are a lot of issues around credit history, credit scores, sort of stable addresses, address history, and the banks as well are not acknowledging the potential of refugee entrepreneurs as a client market too. So I'm hoping to change that and increase the inclusivity of their practices. We also really, really want to support refugee founders to know what's out there. So to be able to improve their financial literacy, and there's been huge demand for this from my community. They don't really know where to look for the right business finance. So I want to create tools to help them, to direct them in the right way. And at the moment, we finished building a self-led survey, which will help direct them to current finance options in a sort of accessible way. And then finally, the loan product, which is what I'm already offering, which is the first microloan for founders here in the UK. And this offers up to £1,000. It's interest-free, and the key thing is that it's supposed to be really quick. So it should be a really quick cash injection at the moment when someone's like testing a business and trying something out. And I try to get it to applicants within 2 weeks if they're successful. It's also community-led, so it's really important to me that there are refugees from TERN's community represented throughout the sort of design process and management process for Skylight. So we have a panel who score every application as it comes in on the online platform, and they are for refugee founders who I know through TERN. And they also help me sort of decide on the strategic direction for Skylight in future. And finally, it really needs to be accessible. So a lot of the entrepreneurs I work with really struggle to access tech. So they might not have access to a laptop or Wi-Fi, or they might find sort of getting online quite hard. So they can also struggle with accessing online grant applications. They may have a lower level of English or literacy in general. So text-heavy forms and online applications can be really, really hard. So the online platform I created has different options for submitting your answers. It works as a sort of video conversation, so they can respond to video questions either with a voice note or a video or a text answer of their own, which I found with feedback to be a lot less off-putting. So we're also hoping to encourage them to apply for future finance to show them that it's, you know, it's feasible, it's a manageable thing to do. So it's also a confidence building exercise in many ways. So yeah, that's a little overview of TERN's work. Anqa, Skylight, I'm happy to talk about them more in a minute if you have any questions. I also have a couple of suggestions. So for anyone who's really interested in learning a bit more, I work with some brilliant partner organizations, and there's not space for them all on this slide, but in light of the announcements this week, there are loads and loads of resources available for anyone who wants to get involved in advocacy or campaigning, or just find out more about facts, you know, about immigration to the UK, refugees and asylum seekers here. Refugee Action have a great website, and they have a really strong fact base there. It's really well researched, so I would recommend that. Also, Google Lift the Ban UK. They are a coalition that have been pushing to get asylum seekers the right to work here from, I think it's about 2018 they started, and that's a really, really important topic. They're starting to gain some momentum, so any voices added to that is always really valuable. Again, another plug, you can also use your consumer choices to make a difference if you'd like. So if you want to shop from Anqa, I'll be sharing the details later on. And actually in June, if anyone who shops in the co-op, there will be a new Ben & Jerry's ice cream flavour coming out. It's actually been designed with entrepreneurs from TERN. So they've come up with the flavour. I might have already said too much. I'm not really supposed to talk about that anymore. But look out for that in the co-op, because some proceeds from that will be going to support Skylight again. So buy ice cream, I would appreciate it. Also, if you'd like to volunteer, you can go onto TERN's website. We have mentoring roles available, business buddy roles. You can support a refugee entrepreneur with a sort of one-off advice session. There are many different things you can do. And finally, just these 4 social enterprises at the bottom, they are some exceptional organizations I've worked with. Refugees at Home, they connect hosts who want to host a refugee or asylum seeker who's looking for accommodation in between housing. They are really lovely. Give Your Best is a cool platform that's very new. So it's essentially good quality clothes donation. So any women who have clothes you'd like to give away, they allow refugee women to then shop online for free. Also professional clothes, they're really in need of those. So for people who are going to interviews, once they are applying for work, Give Your Best allows them to sort of shop from a catalogue of good quality clothing. breadwinners. If you live in London, they have markets. They're in markets across London, and they also sell their bread and pastries online. They train very young asylum seekers and refugees in accounting skills, managing a market stall, sort of leadership skills, and support them with higher education too. And then finally, the bike project. If you're buying a bike, get one from their website. They also gift upcycled bikes to refugees and have gifted hundreds of bikes so far. And yeah, they're also very, very cool. So I'm happy to go to any questions that anyone might have to revisit anything that I just went through. So Will, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Isobelle. Firstly, what an insightful presentation, and a huge congratulations on all of the incredible work that you're doing. Genuinely sounds like you are bettering lives for the hundreds across the country, and really having a really, really meaningful impact. Just a quick one for the audience. There's two types of questions tonight. One, you can pop a question into the Q&A chat, which some of you have already started doing, so thank you. And secondly, you can put your hand up, and Mr. Hunter will then bring you in to the live panel room, where you can have a chat with Isobelle face to face and actually ask in person. Just a quick couple of starter questions from me, I guess, to give you guys some time to think about some of the questions you might like to ask. You've been at TERN for 5 years now, and been with them since the beginning. To kick us off, policies have changed, as they did this week, from the Home Office, the Charity Commission, etc., around the treatment of refugees, how you can work with refugees, etc. How big an impact does those policies have on your work? Does it mean you have to constantly be flexible, expecting a change? And have there been any sort of major stumbling blocks because of a change of legislation?
Really interesting question. Policy-wise, not so much. So we're technically an apolitical organisation. We don't get involved in advocacy. We have great partners who do that. The main things that influence the direction of our work and cause either influx of clients or stumbling blocks is the wider refugee situation. So TERN was set up in response to the crisis in Syria, alongside a lot of social enterprises in London, actually. So there was this real boom in 2016 when lots of our partner organisations also started out. So the main difference in the last 5 years is that they've now all matured, and there's a really great network in the UK for that second phase of integration. So for employability support, higher education support, mental health, business. Interestingly, none of them are like government-run schemes. So we actually have seen an increased interest recently in the government for self-employment support. So for funding enterprise programs, a bit like TERN's. So we took part in a pilot with the Home Office a few years ago, and that was the first time they would really shown interest in that. So it's interesting that there's maybe the economic impact of that holds some weight. In terms of the political landscape, obviously that has moved back and forth on this issue quite significantly in the last 5 years. Obviously announcements like yesterday's have a knock-on effect on the sector. It's a really important conversation to have. I won't pretend to be a policy expert, just I will say that there are very limited routes to legally become a refugee in the UK, and we need to, I think, invest in safer legal routes to make that better for people, because yeah, we currently have resettlement schemes and community sponsorship schemes, but actually I think last year only 9% of the refugees who arrived in the UK last year, 9% was through resettlement. The rest were through what you'd call irregular routes, or what they're saying are illegal routes. So there's sort of this bind where you must be present in the UK to place your asylum claim, but you cannot travel here for the purpose of seeking asylum. So it creates this unfortunate situation. And yeah, we know that deterrent policies, the experts in my sector say that deterrent policies are not the way forward. They didn't work in Australia. They didn't actually bring down the numbers of small boat crossings over there. So we're not confident that will make any difference here, really. But all I know is that most of the community I work with who arrive via irregular routes went on to seek asylum successfully. So we're potentially closing the door on people who have a real right to seek safety here. And I won't, yeah, I'm happy to take questions on it, but I'll stop there for now.
Talking about sort of refugees arriving into the UK and the kind of people you're working with, what's the main demographic of refugees that you are providing these microfinance loans, or you've got on your e-commerce site? Is there a more popular demographic?
It's really varied. So we have over 50 nationalities now in TERN's community. The majority of people come from a mixture of Syria, Iran, Afghanistan, and then Nigeria, Ethiopia, Eritrea. But we have people from all over Asia, from South America, St. Lucia, Mauritius. There are some countries that, honestly, before starting this job, I would not have expected to meet a refugee coming from there. So everyone has a really individual reason for seeking protection. Yeah, it's a privilege to hear some of those stories, but they're very, very, yeah, everyone is very, very different.
And what do you think, aside from actually looking for, once they've established their business, actually getting on that road and starting a business in the first place is an incredibly challenging journey. Yeah. What do you think some of the biggest stumbling blocks are that the refugees face in the first place before actually being able to find themselves in a position where they can start a business and access your kind of support?
Yeah, so before we even get involved, then I would say the asylum process I mentioned before, like the length of it is a huge issue, and the waiting list is growing at the moment. Financial vulnerability is probably the biggest one. So I work with a lot of people who've become homeless during their asylum claim, who haven't been able to sort of stay financially stable through the support they received. So when people come out of that, there's also this interesting dynamic where they had no agency for the duration of the claim. They were sort of waiting on a decision, sometimes for years at a time. And then you arrive at a point where if you receive a successful decision, you become a refugee in the UK, you're protected here, you then have 28 days to vacate the housing you're in, either apply for job seeker support or open a bank account, get a job. These are all huge things. And doing that after a period of time that may have left you very fragile mentally is a huge challenge. So there's definitely, we see a huge sort of point there where people are really, really vulnerable. So by the time people come to TERN, they tend to have been 18 months to 2 years into receiving their refugee status. For one really different demographic, I would say, that we see is with Homes for Ukraine. I've had a huge influx of female tech entrepreneurs into the TERN community who come to the UK via that scheme. They were immediately granted right to work and sort of did not go through the standard asylum process, and their integration has been much more easily facilitated because of that. So I see people who received status sort of a week after arriving formally, they got their card, and then they were able to come to TERN and start a business, because I can't work with people unless they've got that right to work.
And last question from me, before we move to some of the audience's questions. Throughout your presentation, you talked a lot about social impact, which is a huge buzzword in the charity industry. What does this look like to you and TERN is really important for funding requirements, etc.? And I was wondering if you could just dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, sorry, could you just cut out when you said funding? Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. So what does social impact look like to you and TERN? It's a big buzzword in the charity industry and really important for funding and charity commission reports. So,
so how do we measure and show that, and what is it for us? So there are two different kinds, I suppose, with us. There are the metrics we want to put out around business. So how many businesses have we started, and how many entrepreneurs have we supported, how many hours of deliveries, all of those sort of quantitative stats. But we also started measuring something that I feel is more important, but that's because I work more in this area, and that's what we kind of call social and financial well-being matrix we have. And it's around measuring someone's improved status, basically, since being in the UK. So the idea that even working on starting a business and the sort of agency that gives you, and the focus that gives you, the networks that gives you, and the skills, that can contribute to you becoming more integrated socially and financially here, and can actually have a really positive knock-on effect on mental health. So thankfully, we also have funders who are really interested in that side of things. So they don't necessarily support a program with TERN and say, oh, we want X number of businesses that have this, and we want this survival rate after 3 years. Some of them say we want this many people to graduate, and in the report, can we talk about individual stories, how someone finally felt confident enough to apply for a job in IT because they did the pre-incubation program. And the real thing you need to have in place to back that up is a research partnership, which we're lucky enough to. We've been working with the University of Loughborough now for about 4 years, and they've been working on this idea of self-determination, and they've actually taken it way beyond what we could have done with it, and published a paper that came out a few months ago that justifies all of this. And through their research, they've shown that this is significant value. Like, this is adding significant value to people's lives. It's also helping people move further away from being state funding, state benefits. It's reducing stress on mental health services. So there's a much wider impact we can show, which is great, because obviously that insulates us slightly from changing economic circumstances, whereas it's not the easiest time right now to start a business necessarily. That's been a challenge too, I would say.
Really interesting stuff. To move on to some questions from the audience. First one comes from Alexander Ferguson. He says, congratulations on the great work. Many microfinance organisations charge relatively high interest rates. How do you manage to extend zero interest loans?
Yeah, very interesting question. Yeah, and I'm aware that microfinance globally doesn't necessarily have the most positive reputation. So there's a lot of research around that, and like when it can actually be quite a risky scheme to implement. So the 0% interest grew out of necessity, because a lot of my community are of Muslim faith, and for funding to be Sharia compliant, it can't actually have interest attached to the debt. So we started experimenting with that. The reason it's possible is largely down to the kind of funding they seek. So at the moment, the funding we receive from Whole Planet is a grant. So they don't expect any return on their investment. They want impact as their return. So all I have to do is ensure that those funds don't depreciate too much, and they're happy with it revolving and like recycling the funding in the pot, so it continues to pay it forward to sort of future entrepreneurs who can receive it too. We may introduce a second loan product that has a low interest rate. We would always keep it very, very low. But this microlink, it's small enough for that to be possible, just because of the types of funding that we can access. In future, I'm looking for social investment now, so for a combination of sort of debt finance for Skylight itself and grant funding to cover operational costs. So as long as I can keep that balance, then I should be able to continue offering an interest-free product. But it's largely for ethical reasons, and then it has been possible so far because of the types of funder we have on board.
Awesome. This one's an anonymous question. Does the anti-refugee climate make it difficult to raise necessary funds for TERN?
Not in particular. It can make it, no, I would say actually, because the majority of our funding, we started out with a sort of mix of both public and corporate funds. We were part of several EU projects and received sort of grant funding through that. We have now moved much more towards a model that engages corporates. So we had Ben & Jerry's from the beginning. We now work with a lot of funds, so investment funds in London, consultancies, and other corporates who go beyond the normal type of CSR program. So I would say that it depends on the partnership. So I'm actually just thinking there is one example of a recent situation where, yeah, the changing political landscape has meant that funding has been slightly restricted, but for the whole, the corporates we work with will actually push back against that and want to make more of a stand if the political landscape is sort of turning against refugee, like investment in refugee programs. They are happy to show up more, and those are definitely the kind of funders we lean towards working with. The thing that affects it more is actually the economic landscape. So when there's an economic crisis, obviously CSR is the first thing to normally go, and impact is not such an attractive return for companies that are profit making. So that's been an interesting path to navigate. So COVID was a really tricky time for us. We shifted all of our services online. We actually reached out to our supporters and volunteers for the first time to create a sort of donation-based service for a fund that was just for the entrepreneurs, so a hardship fund. And it was the first time we've ever needed to do that. But no, our core costs are well covered by sort of our corporate partnerships, and that's, I don't want to jinx it, but for now, it's been fairly safe.
The next question comes from Daniel Hotchner. Sorry if I've butchered your surname there, Daniel. He says, "Hi Izzy, I was in Carlyon, your year group, but left King's just before you arrived. What do you think refugees you work with think of the revolting Rwanda plan?"
Good question. That's good because I can answer through their perspective rather than my own. Actually, fear was the main response because the possibility that removals would be backdated was a big concern to a lot of members of my community. So I had people asking me like, oh, you know, I came via an irregular route. That's tracked on my claim. Is there any way that I'm going to be taken away? I have kids here now. what's going to happen to me. So we had to put out, as I said, TERN normally remains totally apolitical, but we had to put out advice to the community, sort of saying that we were there to support them. We set up a mental health referral partnership at that time, because we noticed a lot more requests coming in from people feeling really anxious and unstable. So the main response was that, again, I'm not trained in responding to sort of policy questions, but seeing that knock-on effect was fairly harrowing. So these are people who've been in the UK for like 10 to 15 years now, running businesses, have families, and the fear that they might suddenly be taken to somewhere that was a completely different country to their country of origin was there. Like it felt possible to them, even though we were reassuring them that, you know, there are coalitions that are going to prevent this from happening, this won't affect you. The fear was very insidious, and that was quite unsettling to see. In terms of the policy, again, I would just say that deterrent policies like Rwanda have never been proved to be effective in terms of a deterrent, or putting off pull factors, because the reason people come here in the first place tend to be push factors, which we can't really control.
Another anonymous question, and just before that, a gentle reminder, if you do want to ask Isobelle a question live, you're more than welcome to do so. Just pop your hand up in the chat. So this one is more based around how the refugees come across you in the first place. So it's amazing the support that you offer, but the anonymous question is asking, how do refugees come and find you?
The short answer was, so when I started, that was my job. So when I joined TERN, they were looking for someone to go out into the community and engage with refugee groups. So it was me. It's no longer me. But I found lots of different local grassroots organisations, mainly London-based. I went to every workshop I could find that had the word refugee in. I did aerobics, I planted herbs. And the main thing was getting TERN's sort of reputation out there as a safe place that you can come and talk about business. Because what I found, especially from the women-led communities I went into, is that the word entrepreneurship was actually really off-putting. People didn't think that was something that applied to them. They thought that was tech-focused, and that their idea of sort of setting up a food stall or a craft-based business didn't meet the criteria. So that was really interesting, and we changed a lot of the language we used around outreach. And I think me turning up as well made it less scary. I think I helped a bit with that. I don't think I was what people were expecting necessarily. So that was a really interesting phase. But at the end of that year, I had around 90 partner organisations signed up who then referred people to the programmes. So they would remember that we'd come along, and whenever we opened a programme, they'd share our flyers and people would just apply, and that snowballed. So now it's all about word of mouth. Like 60% of our applications come via word of mouth. People find out about TERN through their diaspora communities, and we have sort of TERN entrepreneurs who go out and advocate on behalf of TERN to their own communities. We call them champions, so they do paid work for us where they go and speak about their business and what they've done. So that's definitely shifted that way. It's thankfully not my face anymore.
Next question is another anonymous one. Is there anything that has sparked your interest into helping refugees in the UK? I really appreciate your efforts to contribute to society.
First of all, I would say I love my job. It's incredibly enjoyable. I feel really lucky. I get to work with some of the best people and meet some of the best people. So yeah, it does not feel like a service in any way. I think it was a very incremental process for me. So my background was not at all in refugee or migration policy. A lot of my colleagues have come from that background. But interestingly, I didn't really know much about that until I started reading into it before applying to TERN. When I was in Italy, that was around the time of the first sort of Syrian departures, and there was a lot of talk there around like what was happening in Rome, in the capital city where I lived, and who these people were who were appearing and like, sleeping on the streets. And I became aware of initiatives, like there was one called the Baobab Initiative, supporting refugee women there, and Hummustown, the Syrian food stall I mentioned right at the very beginning. These all started to sort of pop up, and I was aware of them, but I didn't think it was something I'd make a career out of. It was only when I came back to the UK, I was actually looking at diplomacy and sort of foreign office work, and this job popped up, and I thought I would do it as an internship, honestly, and just see what that world is like, and it's translated into a full career. So I now know a lot more than I did then.
Very interesting journey into the job.
Mm.
Jack, clinch this time, asking a question saying, it's great to hear about the work that you're doing. Give us an idea of the inventive things that are sold at your pop-up shop and on your e-commerce platform.
Thank you, Jack. So, wow, I mean, the best product by far, my favorite product, is an Iranian ceramicist who makes these little spoons, like ceramic teaspoons in the shape of faces, and she paints them with these really intricate designs, and she claims there's a face spoon that looks like everyone. So if you ever come to the pop-up shop, your challenge is to find the spoon that looks like you. Because apparently there's one for everyone. She's made over 2,000 now and won't stop, so that might be true. So there's that. We have a lot of artists now coming into the community. So we have sort of watercolor paintings, we have prints, and we have a stone carver. That's something I'm looking into getting onto the website, but it's really difficult to store in the warehouse and to post. So it's like small stone carvings that are really beautiful. A lot of the stuff is really focused around gifting. I'm trying to make it more focused around gifting. I'm introducing gift boxes hopefully later this year. But yeah, clothing, accessories, baklava, honey. There is, yeah, quite a variety on there.
Sounds like there's some yummy treats in there as well.
Yeah, for sure.
I think our very own Mr. Hunter's got a question as well.
Thank you, Will. Isobelle, look, thank you very much. I mean, hugely inspirational, and we will share, whilst there are quite a number of houses that are on and listening and to this talk, we will share it more widely with particularly with the sixth form. Is there any way, we're always looking for ways to support the local community. We're looking for ways to offer things like with some service and with some volunteer work. Is there any way, and you know what it's like at King's, is there any way we can support you? How can we help you with all the wonderful work you're doing?
Oh, great. So definitely through volunteering. So I mentioned some of the mentor and advisor roles available through TERN. Those are on a spectrum. So anyone who's got a few years of work experience can be really helpful, all the way up to people who kind of run multi-million-pound businesses. At the other end of the spectrum, anyone who's a student at school right now and wants to get involved, I would say in June, you're going to have some great opportunities, and to contact me if you're interested in any sort of Refugee Week volunteering. So the Refugee Week Spring Conference is actually next week, and that's when they plan all their events for June, and there's stuff taking place across the country. So there's actually quite a bit happening in Kent through CRAN, the Kent Refugee Action Network. If anyone's interested in, you know, holding a Refugee Week event at King's or in the local area, that would be a really interesting way to contribute, because it's really important to decentralize stuff from London too. There's so much information and support available here, but there's a couple of refugees I work with who actually dispersed to the Medway area recently, and they didn't know any organisations there or kind of anything going on. So if you can set something up around Canterbury or in Kent, that would be amazing. And I'm really happy to put people in touch with the Refugee Week coordinators if they'd like to organise that. It can be as small as like a coffee morning, or you can invite me to come and sell Anqa products at your event as well, at the other end of the spectrum.
We like selling ice creams at things like King's Week as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Back to you, Will. Do you have any other questions or?
We haven't had anything else come through the chat apart from a couple of people asking for your details, Isobelle, who'd like to follow up with you afterwards. So maybe you could pop your email in the chat and they could contact you. I'd just like to say a massive thank you for one, being so generous with your time and coming in and chatting to us all today, and two, such incredible inspirational work that you're doing. Really insightful, innovative, all words that come to mind. So yeah, a big thank you from me. It's been a real pleasure to chat to you today.
Thank you.
And, Sorry, please, Isobelle, talk.
I was just going to say, I don't actually have access to the chat, but happy to share my email with Will. You can pass it on, perhaps. Thank you.
Sure.
Absolutely. And before I thank you again, Isobelle, I just want to thank Will for his time. He's an incredibly busy final year pupil who also not only is the captain of school, but heads up our charity committee here at the school, and we do an awful lot of work with that, as well as sort of running his own charity outside, which is doing huge amounts of social impacts across the world. So thank you so much for your time, Will, today. And Isobelle, you know, a few things resonated with me. Every talk I hear something resonate. And And I can remember when my uncle said to me, you know, choose a job that you do for nothing. And that's rewarding, and that's the most important thing you can do. And you're epitomizing that in terms of the reward that you get for is every single day seeing the impact and everything that you do, and a huge thank you for what you do and helping the refugees in this country get a startup, because it's not easy, and so we really do appreciate that the work that you do in the country. It's absolutely inspirational is a word that we throw around a lot, but this truly is inspirational talk. Look, thank you so much for tonight. Please, by all means, contact into the school if you'd like to get Isobelle's details, and we can pass them on. We really appreciate the time. Best of luck with trying to reach those ambitious targets. You know, I certainly hope you do. And in this really difficult time, in particular, as we talked about, it's hugely topical at the moment with what's been going on. Thank you very much. Thank you, Will. Thank you, Isobelle. Thank you for joining us tonight, and have a really good evening. We'll see you at the next talk. Good night.